Hello, brick sculptors, and welcome back to Brick Sculpt. I have an exciting new video for you today. We are going to talk about studs. Yes, if you watch my videos regularly, you have seen that I just did an entire video on bottoms. It's time for the tops. Now, this one I think is more exciting than the bottoms video because there's a lot to cover here and some really interesting things to discuss when it comes to studs. Now, as you guys probably know, there are three different kinds of studs on top. There are the standard solid stud, the recessed stud, sometimes called the hollow stud, and the open stud that goes all the way through. These different studs have all kinds of different applications. I have laid out in front of you a lot of different pieces, and so we got a lot to talk about, so let's dive in here. We'll start over here with basic bricks. Obviously, our basic building blocks have solid studs. When you go to the Technic variations, they have recessed studs. Now, it's kind of interesting, the different applications for these. Obviously, a recessed stud, most people would think, well, it's designed to take a bar piece or anything that resembles a bar piece. And that is correct, kind of. It really depends on the age of the recessed stud piece. Some of these Technic pieces are older, and you can look at them and see, I don't know how well it shows on camera, the inner diameter of these recessed studs is actually quite a bit smaller. So our bar piece, you can see, is a really tight fit. It barely goes into that one. This is a much newer Technic piece. It slides in pretty freely. So it leads me to believe that there used to be another reason for having recessed studs, not just to fit a bar element. And I think I know what that is. If we take a couple samples here, here's two Technic pieces stuck together. If I just give this a twist, you can see the amount of effort it takes to pop those apart. And those are pretty old. These are pretty much brand new white 1x1 bricks. They pop apart quite a bit easier, and it's a very crisp pop. Now, I think I saw this come up in the bottoms video, that these recessed studs could be for clutch power. And you're going to see more examples of that as we go on. And I think, if you look at Technic sets, they have to be very structurally sound. They're designed to be played hard with and not fall apart. They're designed to make shapes and sculptures and things that are really kind of difficult to make very structurally sound out of normal Lego. And so I think it has to do with clutch power. And as time went on, they kind of gave it a double feature where it will also take a bar piece. The interesting thing is these are all the female side Technic pieces. If you look at the male side ones, solid studs on top. Solid studs on top. Although the ones that have a plate top facing upward are recessed studs. Interesting. And this is kind of an axle piece, recessed studs. So kind of interesting where they decide to put them and where they decide not to. So it really makes you think about kind of the logic. And I'm sure some of the things I'm going to cover here have to do with the age of the piece as well. But I'll also show you some examples that show that the age of the piece doesn't always mean a lot when it comes to this stuff. So let's move on here. When we get into our jumper plates, kind of all our variations of jumpers here, they are recessed studs. Except when we get to the round. That one has an open stud. Kind of strange, right? Some of my favorite pieces, I did a whole video on this 1x2 piece. But any of these round plate pieces, I know I'm missing the 4-long version. I haven't bought those yet. I know they're out there. They're quite expensive and kind of hard to find. But there is a 4-long version too. And that actually, I think, only has 2 open studs. But these are all open studs until you get to the 5-long, which has the Technic cross in the middle, and 4 hollow studs, or recessed studs. Interesting. Now, this could be a testament to the age of this piece. This piece has been around for a long time in Technic sets, and it could have started more as a clutch power feature and kind of graduated into more of a bar fitting feature as time went on. So all of its little siblings here are open stud, and it has recessed studs. Kind of interesting. And it's not just older pieces, though, that have the recessed stud versus open stud. For example, 1x1 round brick, unless you go way, way back, has had an open stud. Same with the 1x1 cone. I know this is the newer version. It's got kind of the straight taper, not the curve, but both of them have had open stud. Now this one I'm sure you're familiar with, the minifig head. It's kind of a halvesy. Well, technically it's just a recessed stud because you can't put something all the way through it, but as you probably know, they used to have solid studs. And they did that more for a preventative of a choking hazard, but that's kind of an interesting little application for it right there. This piece is quite interesting, and I don't know if you guys know this, maybe you do. The kind of early applications of this piece were always to use it as like a slider on the bottom of a boat, usually boats, so it would move freely and not hang up on the floor or the table that you're pushing the boat around on. And I've always found it kind of interesting. This has 4 recessed studs. Typically, this didn't used to have a lot of applications, but again, it could be a clutch power thing. So very interesting on that one. When we get into our dish pieces, the 2x2 open stud, the newer 3x3 open stud, and 4x4 solid stud. Although I do believe they have newer versions of this. I probably have some around here somewhere that have an open stud. But it's interesting because these come from a similar generation, and the older 2x2s, as far as I remember, always had an open stud. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they've always had open studs. A couple other interesting examples here. The microscope piece, recessed stud on top, open studs on the side. These fence pieces, open studs on this taller, shorter one, and on the longer one, recessed studs, although they do make this in both versions. So some kind of interesting applications, and these have always been used to hold tools and accessories and things in sets. Let's get back down here to some of these round pieces. So I've already mentioned the 2x2 jumper round with the open stud. You've got kind of this toilet bowl piece, open stud in the bottom, but then you get to like a dome here, it's just recessed. So it's kind of interesting to see their logic here, because these two pieces are kind of naturally made to go together, at least I think they are. And you would think that they would share that characteristic, and they don't. The top doesn't have the open stud, and the bottom does. Same with this one here, recessed stud. When we go to our 2x2 round brick and our 2x2 round plate, those are interesting because they don't have a open stud or a recessed stud or a solid stud in the middle. They have solid studs on the outside. They have a Technic cross. Now that doubles as a bar holder. So I guess it's kind of an open stud, but kind of not. So maybe that could be incorporated in more techniques and more pieces. Who knows? This was a piece I discovered recently, and I was thinking, this is a good alternative if you're looking for a 2x2 round, but you need recessed studs on top on all 4 of these studs. This piece is like a half cylinder. You put 2 of them together, and you essentially have this piece, but with recessed studs. That's kind of cool. The textured version also has solid studs. Up here I have a few decorative pieces. So this piece is kind of a jumper, but not really. It's got some characteristics of a jumper, but it really isn't a jumper. And it has the same top as our 1x2 jumper plate. The corner version, same thing. And this is an awesome decorative piece. And it has a recessed stud as well. Now this is quite obvious. They did this so it can hold things like a candle or a decorative item on that part that sticks out. But they only do the recessed stud on that part and then a solid stud on the part that would theoretically put into a wall or a structure of something. Interesting. Let's talk plates. These are simple. All the standard plates, really no matter what shape, size, curves, wing pieces, angles, all of these just seem to have solid studs. That's pretty easy. It doesn't get until you get into the more weird stuff like the rounds and the jumpers that they start to give you a little more flexibility. And honestly, that's part of the reason why I think this piece and this piece and this piece have gotten so popular, is it opens up so many doors, because this often replaces a 1x2 plate because you need those open studs on top. I also forgot to mention here, the 1x1 round obviously comes in both, and they still make both. So it's kind of interesting. I guess my question for you guys would be for the future, do you think these are best left alone? Do you think these would be best with recessed studs or open studs, or a combination of all of that? Be curious. Let me know down in the comments what you think, because I could definitely see some advantages to having recessed studs on these. I could definitely see some advantages of having open studs, but I could also possibly see some disadvantages to having those too. And it might take away from the classic look when you have these down in a base plate and having a bunch of holes in them. So let me know below what you think, and think if LEGO is doing this right. A lot of this stuff seems to make sense. And a lot of this stuff, I mean, LEGO's been around a long time. They've made a lot of different parts over a lot of different ages. So it's kind of hard to tell what was just changed over time as they kind of improved stuff, and what was kind of more intentional. So speaking of some newer bricks, not all of these are new, but a lot of them are, let's talk about snot pieces. Now before I do, I want to clear something up. In the older video, I said snot pieces, and somebody didn't like that. They said, no, snot is a technique, not a piece. Well, I would say it's both. A piece like this is quite obviously going to be used for snot technique. So I don't see why you couldn't call that a snot piece. It's definitely a technique, but there's a lot of pieces in this category, I would say, are the majority of them that cater to that technique and are kind of characteristic for being snot pieces. Now, yes, you can do snot with almost any piece if you use the right pieces with it, but I don't see anything wrong calling these snot pieces. Let me know if you disagree with that in the comments. All right, anyway, moving on. Snot pieces. Now, the more standard snot pieces, your 2 long, 4 long, 1 long, corner, and the Travis brick, I don't have a Travis brick here, they all have open studs, which is kind of cool. You can push things into them, bars, you can push plants into them, all kinds of different stuff if you're doing detail work. And even the headlight brick. So if you're talking older parts not having this, this is pretty much the godfather or grandfather, I don't know which one, of the snot category. The headlight brick is the OG. It's got an open stud in it. But it's interesting when you go to this category, recessed studs. Why those would be different, I have no idea. If you know, let me know below in the comments, because that is kind of strange. This one's also recessed studs. These shorter ones are recessed studs. So kind of weird. When we get to brackets, they're pretty much all recessed studs. And they even have one of these really old-fashioned ones here. Kind of a strange piece. And this kind of also proves my point. I don't want to break this because it's kind of an old, rare piece. But if you try to push a bar in here, it just kind of barely fits. It's a really tight fit, and you kind of feel like you're going to break it. And if you go to one of these newer brackets, real simple. It's a really nice fit. So on something like this, it likely was a clutch power thing. I don't know how it contributes to clutch power, but I really do believe that it does. If you disagree, let me know, or if you know more than I do about that, let me know below. Moving on here. This I find really interesting too, and I think this also plays into my clutch power theory. The slopes, when you're talking like the downward slopes, they all have solid studs. When you talk about the opposite version, the upward facing slopes like this, they all have hollow studs. And likely could be a clutch power thing. They only do it on the part that's hanging over. They don't do it on the part that's attaching in the wall. Now, again, some of the older ones, really tight fit. I don't think these were really intended to put bars in them. The newer ones, real simple fit. I even found this one, which is a genuine Lego. I'll try to get close here so you can see. But it has very small holes in the center of those open studs. So kind of interesting. And that kind of helps prove the theory that it wasn't necessarily for bar pieces, because that would never fit in there. But here's something interesting. When we get into this one, the 2-high version of this slope, solid stud. The 3-high, open stud. But there's also variations with recessed stud, and then probably could find one with a solid stud. I couldn't find one in my collection. It may or may not be out there. So they've this could be something that's just changed over time. But kind of interesting. Same thing here with the inverse opposite version. It's got recessed studs. And as we all know, these longer 1x1x5 wall pieces or post pieces, solid stud. And I didn't have any in white, but they make a recessed stud version as well. I tried to keep this board all white. I think it looks really nice and clean. And this concept applies to larger pieces too. Now, a lot of these are more structural for boats and aircraft and things, but any of these with the opposite facing slope all have open studs. And I think it's more of a clutch power thing. Last but not least, we have wall elements and larger panel elements. Now, this is kind of interesting. This is an older 1x2x2 panel, and it has solid studs. The newer version, this one has these little ridges here, and that has recessed studs. Now this is a 1x2x3, and it's kind of in between these two generations because it has these rounded corners where these ones are really sharp, but it doesn't have the supports on here. So it's kind of in between. And that's recessed studs also, but they did also make that with solid studs. And same when you go to the larger panel, this is an older one, but it has recessed studs. In fact, this has the sharp corners as well, so it's kind of more of this generation than this, but it has recessed studs. And they do make versions with solid studs as well. So there's lots of different ways, and again, maybe a clutch power thing, I don't know. But it is kind of interesting, the different variations there over time. Now here let's talk about some larger elements. I have a larger wall panel here with recessed studs, and then a lot of these big structural elements, pretty much anything like that is going to have recessed studs. And I'm guessing that's probably for increased clutch power, because these are all going to be more structural elements that you'd be building with. And, a lot of these big hollow things have that to kind of grab onto stuff. This one's real interesting. I don't know why. They have one of each. They have a hollow stud and a recessed stud on one piece. So I hope you guys found this interesting. I got a lot of really cool stuff here, lots to talk about. Please leave me some comments. I love learning from you guys. One of the main reasons I make these videos is just to get that awesome feedback from you guys and kind of learn the things that you know that I don't. And hopefully I can tell you a few things that you didn't know that I did or that I learned along the way. Well, that's all I got for this time. I hope you guys liked this video. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm going to do more just like this in the future. And we will see you next time. Oh, by the way, I forgot. Duplos have recessed studs too. Huh.